Center of Pakistan and International Relations Islamabad organized an international conference titled, Kashmir under the Sanctity of UN Declaration of Human Rights and Challenges to Kashmiris' Right to Self-Determination, on December 10, International Human Rights Day. This conference engaged the international scholars, journalists and human rights activists from Italy, USA, Turkey and Pakistan to share their insight on the subject and highlight the human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. This conference acted as a platform for the global movement on Kashmir. President of COPAIR, Ms. Amna Malik, commenced the session by highlighting the important role of the international community for advocating the human rights of citizens and highlighting the repression of radicalized government of India in the occupied region.
This all support why I choose this day, 10th of December, because it is an International Human Rights Day, and it has its significant importance to highlight our global movement on human rights violation in Indian occupied Kashmir. And I'm thankful to Dr. Tessin and many of our friends who were already in our previous webinars, because we just wanted to make a group of like-minded people who should support this cause. So the topic of today's webinar is Kashmir under Sanctity of UN Declaration of Human Rights. And we would like to highlight the challenges for the right of self-determination. And finally, we ask all the worthy speakers that please guide us that what should be the solution of this issue.
Dr. Tessin Nisar, the guest speaker and co-moderator from Italy, shared the findings of her research and shed light on the quintessential relevance of Kashmir within the debate of universal human rights.
So in my presentation, which is focused on the theme as entitled, The Quintessential Relevance of Kashmir Within the Debate on Human Rights, I would like to divide it into three parts. The first part will reflect upon the background, of course, the introduction to this debate. The second part will cover the discourse on rights. For example, the stance and the verdict given by rights organizations, as well as I would like to focus on the reports pertaining to Kashmir and also pertaining to the human rights violation of India. And the third part is basically the part of conclusion.
Dr. Domenico Melidoro, a research scholar from Italy, talked about issues of multiculturalism between minority rights and human rights in religiously volatile societies and emphasized that an ideal democracy never compromises on the rights of minorities.
Today is an important day concerning human rights, so my talk will address the issue of human rights in relation with minority rights. I did a lot of academic work on multiculturalism and minority rights, and I had a special concern with regard to the compatibility between human rights from one side and minority rights from the other. In fact, at the first sight, you could say that there is a sort of inconsistency between human rights and minority rights.
Dr. Fabio Balsamo, a PhD in ecclesiastical law, shed light on the prevalent condition of religious minorities in India with a specific focus on the religious intolerance in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir,
such as the legal status of religious minorities in contemporary societies, and in particular on the condition of Islamic communities in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I also greet all the authoritative colleagues and speakers. Today's debate takes on even more interest in consideration of the 72nd anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, still not adequately applied by many signatory states. The experience of what is happening to the detriment of the Islamic communities of Kashmir is in fact only one, even if striking, of the demonstrations. The United Nations Declaration imposed the need to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, but did not go beyond their generic affirmation on a mainly individual level. In this sense, the declaration shared the same approach of other Western declarations on human rights, and in particular the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen promulgated in France in 1789 and 1793, and the American Declaration of Independence of 1776.
Syed Mahmood Kazmi, a Kashmiri hailing from the USA, shared his personal experience of suffering and repression wreaked by the Indian occupational forces. He focused on the disruption of Kashmiri children's right to education due to widespread lockdowns and fear of life.
Today is a Human Rights Day, so I cannot wish everyone a Human Rights Day because a lot of us are suffering on their rights to liberty, to life, to, so many other things. Their rights are taken. So I was given this topic to discuss the plight of Kashmiri children who are the supreme effectees in the deadly conflict between Pakistan and India since 1947. The main issues children are facing in the region currently are violence and lack of education. Boys have been abducted during midnight raids by the security forces, and girls and women have been molested during the nighttime raids by the officers of Indian tyrannical forces. The situation of children in occupied valley of Kashmir is seriously grim. According to the fact-finding mission, which spent 5 days in the occupied valley, around 13,000 boys were picked up from their homes in the middle of night, from their beds, and were being held indefinitely, illegally, either in the army camps or in the police stations during the lockdown after the abrogation of Article 370.
A journalist and geopolitical expert from Rome, Dr. Barbara Gallo, spoke about the denial of freedom of speech and communication blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
I would like to speak about a country where these rights have been totally overridden, Kashmir. 70 years after the partition of the Indian subcontinent, there has been no change for the bereaved and pained people of Kashmir, who still remain under the punitive and strenuous weight of the Indian occupation. For decades, Kashmiri have been struggling for the exercise of the right to self-determination. On the 5th of August 2019, with the presidential decree revoking the Article 370 and 35A of the Constitution, India illegally merged the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir.
Professor Angelo Santagostino from Turkey shared his European perspective on the human rights question of Jammu and Kashmir by saying that it has been over a century since Kashmiris are suffering from human rights abuses. He highlighted that the Modi's regime is engaged in the centralization of power and moving towards cultural and religious intolerance.
The principle of self-determination, my impression is that has been somehow abused in these times. It's not an absolute right, the right of self-determination. And I'm thinking, for instance, to the case of the Spanish separatism, what happened a couple of years ago, or some 3 years ago now in Catalonia. Well, frankly speaking, I think that this is an abuse of the right of self-determination. This right has been elaborated in the context of decolonization, so has to be limited to this particular issue. And by the way, there is no question about the fact that this right exists in the case of Kashmir, not only because it's part of a resolution of the United Nations, but also because it is strictly linked with the process of decolonization, in which this principle of self-determination has been elaborated.
Ms. Amna Malik, President COPAIR, concluded the session by providing recommendations and asking the speakers on the panel to put forth their suggestions for the resolution of Kashmir conundrum. She summed up the session by stressing that there is a need to revisit our policy on Kashmir and reinforce the diplomatic efforts to expedite the process of resolution of this prolonged issue.
We are having a number of sessions and webinars and research reports, and I'm thankful to all the panelists who provided their research papers to us. I would like to make it an interactive session so that we can keep on adding points, and I would like to invite all of you that if you have any point while I'm sharing the recommendations with you, so all of you are most welcome. So I'll move step by step. I'm thankful to all of you that we discussed that Kashmiri humans are deprived of human rights. And I think on this International Human Rights Day, we need to raise more voices like we did today. So my first recommendation is that Pakistani government should revise its diplomatic strategy, and we should have more advocacy and lobbying at the international level, and we try to force UN and other international organizations to enforce Indian government on the right of self-determination, providing religious freedom to the Muslim minorities and protection of civil rights. I also agreed because one of the panelists mentioned that OIC played a very important role. So we can also further in future also offer OIC recommendations. Dr. Tanzeen mentioned about Criminal Court of Justice, that we should also highlight the criminal human right violation, and we should opt over there as well.
COPAIR will publish the recommendations provided by the panelists and keep on advocating the human rights of Kashmiri people. However, for the peaceful resolution of Kashmir, there is dire need to work on lawfare, diplomatic advocacy and engagement of all of the stakeholders.